Hello, man. How are you?
Hey Felix, how are you doing? I'm good.
Great stuff. Uh, welcome for those who dialing in or watching this on replay. We had a really interesting webinar today. A little bit different format. Um, I'm calling it the fireside chat, but Manu is the star of the show. We'll get him to introduce himself a little bit. But we're gonna dive into all things query rag related and data agent, and actually dive into a new component of Denodo we released recently, the AI SDK. So without further ado, so here's what the fireside chat is actually about. So my name is Felix Liao. I'm the Director of Product Management, responsible for the APAC region, which is why I'm based in Sydney, Australia. As you can see here, we do have the fire in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but then we have many all the way on the other side of the planet, literally in the United States. So Manny, why don't you go ahead and do a quick intro of yourself?
Perfect. Thank you, Felix. So my name is Manuel Rodriguez. I'm originally from Spain. I studied mathematics and computer science in Madrid. But a few years after that, after graduating from my bachelor's, I began my master's in data analytics in Boston, and that's why you see me on that side of the planet right now. And I really got introduced to AI in my bachelor's thesis. I remember I did a stock market predictor algorithm, and honestly, I've always been interested in having computers do things for us and making it easier for us. So that's really how I ended up at Denodo as the lead developer of AI.
Great, man. I must say it's great to have you here, right? We work very, very closely. We talk a lot, and I mean, I do a lot of talking and do a lot of building, so seems to work out pretty well.
Good
But without that,
combination.
we're gonna dive right in to RAG and query. We're gonna start with RAG first, right? For those of you who's involved in this area, you probably have some understanding of RAG, which has become very, very popular as a way to augment your LLM and your AI applications using proprietary or existing data sets. But Manny, why don't you go ahead and give everyone a bit of an overview around how would you explain RAG and why it's so useful?
Yeah, so I'm guessing everyone here has used any of the famous chatbots nowadays, Claude, ChatGPT, even DeepSeek that came out recently. And you can ask them questions directly, and that's fine. They're trained on vast amount of data, so they're able to answer about important questions. But the problem is that their training is limited. Like there's a limited amount of data. Even in time as well. It's not about quantity, but in time as well. Um, so really, to get those very smart systems to work for us and be more useful to us, that's how we need to implement. That's when we need to implement retrieval-augmented generation RAG, which is simply adding that information that they need to answer the question, be it news sites or be it specific knowledge about a certain domain, and they just give it to the LLM, and then the chatbot or the LLM is able to answer us with a higher level of precision without going through any further steps.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I've also been working with a lot of customer around using the RAG pattern, right? Obviously, the skill level is a lot lower, as you touched on. And the other thing I would say is that even if we can pre-train and fine-tune LLM for specific purposes, a lot of the time the enterprise data changes so rapidly, right? It's unlikely you're gonna have to retrain something every week or every month. So, having RAG to the ability to dynamic inject knowledge insights in this dynamic way without retraining model is very, very powerful and a very elegant model. Okay, so that's RAG. We actually gotta switch that up and talk about query RAG. So I think most of you who's being involved in this area, you probably heard of RAG and you've looked at many, many example of RAG, which by and large, I think most example, many coming on this, are focused around unstructured stuff, PDFs and text documents and stuff like that, how you can chunk the text, embed it and so forth. Um, but I don't know. We're a data management company, and we've been working with a lot of company and customers around how do we implement the RAG pattern around structured or tabular data? How do we inject, augment, this AI pattern, AI application using structured information, which turns out to be a little bit different, Manu, isn't it?
Yeah. So Query RAG is really a fork of the normal RAG. And to really understand it, I'll just go a little bit over how to implement RAG, and that way we'll be able to understand the difference with Query RAG. So in normal RAG, what you do is use a vector store with embeddings, which is a way of getting similarity search. So if we give it a question, it's able to get results from a PDF or from a knowledge base that most closely relates to the question you're making. And then these results, they will be passed to the LLM, and then the LLM will answer, the chatbot will answer using that information. That's the normal RAG pattern. With Query RAG, we apply a similar concept. So we still use the vector stores and we still use the embeddings. But instead of embedding chunks of a PDF or chunks of a knowledge base, we embed chunks of schemas, of table schemas, to be able to understand where our data might be. Now, this is just a broad approach. And then we'll use the LLM to filter out the correct ones, but it's a good start. And then from that, we'll select the perfect tables to answer our question. We will generate an SQL query, and this is where the difference with RAG is. In normal RAG, you would just pass the chunk as is to the LLM, whereas in Query RAG, we actually have to generate an SQL query on it. We have to execute the SQL query, and then that execution result is what we pass to the LLM to be able to confidently answer our question.
Yeah, I think the point is actually really valid, right? So in a query rack scenario, the steps actually are more complex, and there's two distinct phases, right? To your point, there is the first phase around using embedding to do the table matching, right? And that involves metadata, sample data, and obviously in a large enterprise with many different technologies, different table, that's a complex thing by itself. And the second phase is, once you have the table, you still really can't answer the question unless you run the SQL, execute the data. So there's a secondary phase where the flow has to be able to execute a proper SQL that might need to connect to different systems and bring the data back from the query and then send that back as the piece of data you need to augment into the response. So it's quite interesting. We've been working with this for quite a long time. We think we've got the pattern pretty much nailed. But I'm just curious, right? I mean, obviously, Manuel, you coming from the developer perspective, if you don't have Denodo, for example, today, and a customer asks you, say, I want to connect to Snowflake, I want to connect to Salesforce, I want to connect to my data lake, what would you have to do? Why would it be more difficult, and how much effort will be involved? Just talk us through that.
Yeah, so I mean, and it's happened to me many times in personal projects. I've got a bunch of SQLite databases, Postgres databases, different systems all around. So I just need to go find the Python library component, be able to connect to them, retrieve all the schemas, all the data, and then pass it into my query rag flow. So obviously, I would have to get the individual Python component for each one of those data sources. That's what I do.
Yeah, let alone the security aspect of it. How do you join table across different systems? I mean, LLM as good as LM is, it doesn't really have the concept of a generating optimal SQL. So yeah, from our experiences, it's a pretty challenging thing to do, which is
Yeah.
why speaking of which, a lot of our customer are trying to do this through Denodo. Right, so let me kind of provide a quick overview for everybody. So Denodo, for those of you that are not familiar with us, we're a logical data management platform that focuses on data delivery through data visualization technologies, right? So as you can see from this slide, we are focused on environment where you have large set of different data sets. Could be traditional data warehouse, cloud data warehouses, could be files, could be applications, could be SaaS environments where you need to deliver data in a unified way to BI application or data science application. But as it turns out, right, when you think about the query rack pattern, having a unified access layer that has a simple security control plane that has an optimized SQL engine, it's actually a pretty elegant way to deliver the data for the query rack pattern, right, as many talked about. So essentially, what we seeing in the last little while is that a lot of our customers are doing exactly that. Right? Figure, hey, I have this nice, clean, simple, unified interfaces for metadata access, for generating SQL, and they start kind of using and talking to us. Right, hey, how can I use it in order to build a chatbot, which they can, and we are simplifying a lot of that component. But what we also saw, and many of you started to get involved in that, there's some additional pieces customer need. One is LangChain or Llama Index, is orchestration piece, which anyway, I'll get you to talk about what that is, and then a vector database becomes needed. Um, and so what we realize is some repeating patterns in terms of how customers are building these components together. And just in the last a few months, we've released a new component called the Denodo AI SDK, which pre-built a lot of this stuff already in terms of integration, in terms of flow, in terms of patterns. And so the end result is that customer can deploy these AI application or chatbot much, much faster, right, in a fraction of the time. And and that's the piece we're going to demo today. But Manu is the guy that actually built the SDK. And why don't we actually, Manu, why don't you go in and dive in, right? Tell us what is the thing that we built, or you built specifically, what's in it, and how does it really help customer in terms of deploying AI applications?
Okay, so the Denodo SDK, the SDK is a suite of it consists of an API endpoint, which you can connect to any normal chatbot or agentic flow that you have already configured. And it also comes, which is the backend, it's where the query rag pattern is implemented in those endpoints. And then it also comes with an example chatbot, which serves as a front end to be able to actually interact and see the query rag pattern in live in action. So as part of those API endpoints, we have different endpoints like get metadata, which handles all the part which is connecting to the data sources, embedding the schemas of the table, and actually loading the vector store. And then we have the answer question endpoint. So we have answer question, which was the normal query rag pattern, but we also have like two specialized endpoints, which we'll talk about a little bit more afterwards, but to be able to talk to either the data or the metadata, which is part of the functionality of the ACK. And then we build this on Python and LangChain to be able to have support for all. The good thing about LangChain is that it's able to abstract a lot of the complicated concepts with AI. So that's already a head start in that aspect. So we'll be able to connect to OpenAI, we'll be able to connect to DeepSeek, we'll be able to connect to Claude, to any different vector stores, with any different embeddings models. There's so many moving pieces here in the AI landscape that LangChain really helps us and helps the ASDK connect to all those things that we want to get connected to. And then the actual query rack pattern is implemented in the API endpoints that will connect to everything and make the query rack pattern simple and come alive.
So a couple of follow-up questions, man, right? So, I speak to a lot of people about this, and there's some really common questions. So it looks like LangChain and Python is an embedded part of the SDK. In order for customers to use and deploy, do they need to understand LangChain?
Absolutely not. It's very plug and play. Um, all from a simple web interface. You can just get everything up and running. You don't even need to look at the Python code if you don't want to.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you mentioned it's open source, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's the good thing, and that's one of the good things about the ASDK in general is it's thought with a lot of flexibility in mind. So we'll check out the Swagger documentation afterwards, but nearly every single part of that query rack pattern can be personalized to a specific use case. Um, and that's one of the good things about the ASDK. So if a developer wants to even get into the Python code and customize it for their own use case, they can go right ahead.
Yeah, so as Manny mentioned, one of the things we're trying to offer through our SDK is the flexibility in terms of downstream applications, right? So, we've talked to plenty of customers. We show you the sample chatbot. I think it's pretty cool, pretty useful, but obviously we have customers who prefer their own downstream applications. In this case, we've actually built knowledge base article in terms of how you can use your API in the SDK to embed the chatbot into Teams, Power BI, Copilot. So the downstream application is just a surfacing point, right? We work with just about anything that can take advantage of the API, which is pretty cool, right? And we've done a few pilots and projects around that. Um, with that said, I think I started to see the thing in action. So why don't you take over and let's do a quick demonstration of this SDK.
Perfect. Let's go ahead. I will share my screen. Can you see it?
Yep, got it.
Okay, so we're first gonna go ahead into the actual ASDK configuration, and then we'll review the data sources that we're connected to, and then we'll actually check out the chatbot. But this is basically the configuration file. You'll have to do this first time you load up. Anyone that loads up the SDK, they'll have to configure this. But then it's pretty straightforward to get it up and running. So as we can see, we've got the host and the port. We have the URL connection to the Denodo data catalog, which is where all the data is present. We select the databases that we want to expose to the SDK. And there are a lot of parameters. I'm not going to get into them. Um, Here we have the vector store configuration. We have support for Chroma, pgvector, and OpenSearch, which are three major players in the vector store, area. And so you can quickly configure one of those three um, very easily through the configuration file. Then we have the LLM, which will be able to configure any of the top state-of-the-art models from Bedrock, OpenAI, Azure, Google, Anthropic. And very recently, we added support for Olama and Google AI Studio, which are very good. Well, Google Studio is very good for testing. It's not meant for production. And Olama is very good for using open source models in your local machine. So you don't even need to connect to the internet. And we just select the provider and the model, in this case, GPT-4o and OpenAI. We select the embeddings provider and the embeddings model. And finally, if we need to configure any of those specific parameters for the providers like OpenAI, then we'll need to input the API key, or in the case of Solana, the base URL. And that's really it. It's LLM, it's embeddings, it's vector store, and it's the data catalog connection. Once you have that, there are a lot of extra parameters to play with, but that's the gist of the config
Yeah, I
file.
know. Before you start the SDK,
Yeah.
we sort of mentioned earlier. So that's all you need to do, right? To deploy the
That's all you
SDK.
need to do.
I haven't said that. I do see you've got all the Python files on the left-hand side. That's all part of the SDK.
Yeah,
So if someone wants to, for example, they don't like the way we deal with metadata flow, they can actually go in and change it themselves, right?
absolutely. And it's even encouraged. We accept issues. Well, it's freely available on GitHub, so we accept any contributions over there.
Great stuff. All right. What's next?
Perfect. Well, let's while we're here in the Visual Studio, let's load up the chatbot. So we just have to do run.py both, in this case both, because we're going to load both the API and the chatbot, but we can just do API if we wanted to, or we could do both if we wanted to. So let's go ahead and load this up. And we see the sample chatbot is running, so we're going to open it. And before logging in here, let's go and check out how our data sources look like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
So
So
in this,
how do
yeah,
I plug in the data?
yeah, exactly. So here, as we can see, we've got a Postgres database with a sample banking demo, which we use for testing, and it's a really good demo. It comes included with the SDK, and it's a really good demo to actually see what the SDK can do. So here we have the Postgres database. And then once we've connected the Postgres database to the Denodo, we'll be able to have all these different tables available to us. So for example, we've got the loans table
I was going to say,
and
what about my customer who's got Snowflake? How do they plug that in?
true. So we can go here, we can go to File, New Data Source, and we can make use of any connector well, one of the many connectors that the Denodo has already compatible. Uh,
Cool. There's
so
Snowflake.
here we see.
I see it. Okay.
I, I can keep going down.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I got
It
the
has a
idea.
lot. It has a lot. Yeah. Um, okay, and so then we load up the data source, we get the views, the tables, and we can see the actual data that we're going to be playing with today, which is all generated, but it's quite complex. It's got a lot of associations between it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we'll talk about
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna say we're not gonna spend too much time on the design studio, but in a real scenario, this might be done by someone else. So perhaps I might be the one that actually set up these databases connections and connect to the base views, and actually just give that credential to Manuel, who will actually connect it through an SDK. So that's kind of the benefit and power where as an AI developer, the access engine, the SQL generation, the security control is all completely abstracted away, right?
Yeah. And the SDK will have complete access to everything we see on my screen right now. I'll have complete access to it. I don't have to click anything. I can just ask, right? That's the good thing. So let's go ahead into the chatbot. Let me log in. Okay,
So
so
you're in a
first
bank,
time
right? You're in the bank.
I'm in the bank. I'm in the bank already. Do you want a
Okay.
loan?
I'm trying to
So
set up the mood for you.
yeah, yeah. So I'm in the chatbot first. I'm running the SDK. First thing I need to do, obviously, to start the query rack pattern is embedding the schemas that we saw before in the Denodo Design Studio. So I'm gonna go up here. I'm gonna click the sync vector DB. I'm gonna type in the database that I want to embed.
So
I'm
you
gonna
could
select three
choose
examples.
which database you want to go. I could, so for example,
Absolutely.
HR, for marketing, you can just choose whichever you want to talk to.
Absolutely. And you can choose multiple. If we had samples bank tool, then we could embed both of them. And the SDK would consider both of them when answering our questions.
Cool.
I'm going to head and click sync. And while it's syncing, I'll explain the examples per table. Because it's not, if you just send the schema over to the LLM, to the chatbot, a lot of times it's not going to be able to really understand the data and it can lead to hallucinations. So that's why we implemented the examples per table option, because it's like if you were a human, well, if a human was dealing with the data, you would rather actually see the data than just the schema, right?
So
To
the
get a
sample data,
feel
you
for the
mean?
data. Yeah, so that's why we load three examples per table, reload sample data in the embedding process.
Cool.
So this is loaded up, and now it's locked and loaded and ready to go. Do you want me to go ahead, Felix?
Yeah, go for it. So yeah, show us
Let's
what you can ask.
Perfect. Let's start by, hey, can I ask you some questions? And once we get a positive answer from the LLM, sure, it can help us with that. I'm going to take here a quick second to explain a few things of the interface. So here to the left, we can see this icon that says LLM. It'd be nice to stay focused on this icon throughout this whole demo because it will change color and it will help us understand where the LLM is going to answer our questions. This means that sometimes it will say, okay, I don't need to access anything regarding Denodo. I can just answer myself and it'll stay white. Or it can be a data question like, how many loans do we have? And then it'll go blue and it'll say data. Or finally, we have the metadata option as well, which we can ask questions about the actual schema of the tables we have in the database, and it'll go red. So I just wanted to point that out because it'll change, and it's an interesting part of the SDK. So let's go ahead and ask, what tables do I have related to loans? Because obviously we could have, right now I only have the banking data set loaded, but we could have two, three databases with a lot of data. So I just want to pull the tables that are related to loans. So let me go ahead and ask the SDK that. We see that immediately changes to metadata, and it's able to detect that it's a metadata question. And here we have the tables that are most related to loans. So we have samples bank loan, loan officer, payment, underwriting, and then it's able to generate some related questions in case I want to support myself on them. Another thing I want to point from this part is that the querying, this part over here, which says querying the Denodo 4, that is the specific query that is being sent to the AI SDK, which is good to know because if you want to replicate the results you get in the front end through the API directly, that would be the query you'd have to input.
So the most one is
So let's
interesting, right? I was going to ask, so
yeah.
how does it determine the fact this one is a metadata question?
So I mean, based on the question it receives, it's able to detect whether it needs to access only the schema or if it actually needs to generate an SQL query.
So that's
And
a flow
depending on
that you
that,
already built in the back end.
yeah, this is the complete query rack flow implemented into the SDK with the option before it to actually go into the whole query rack or just treat it as normal rack, which is the metadata pattern. So let's get some data and let's ask, for example, how many loans did we handle in 2023? And this is the actual query rack pattern live. So it will go to
So
the
this
vector
one's actually
store,
gonna,
and
this one will actually execute a query, in other words.
yep, yep. We will go to the vector store, we'll find the related tables, we will generate an SQL query, we will execute the SQL query, and I haven't even finished talking, and it already did it for me. That's honestly how fast it is. Um, so it's telling me that we handled 7 loans in 2023. We can see here below in the context, all the gray tables, well, all the tables there are the tables that it considered to answer our question. But the green table is the one that it finally selected to generate the SQL query on and execute the SQL query on and get the data. And now to the right-hand side, we have two buttons. We have one, we can download the CSV file. In this case, it's a simple CSV file with 7 loans, so it doesn't really make sense to download it, but it's interesting for bigger data sets. And we also have this other button, which will tell us the SQL query that it generated, which looks perfectly correct to me, and a little explanation of why it generated that query and what it was looking for. And this is good in case the SDK ever fails, you can guide it in the right direction. Um, okay, let's go a little bit, because this was a simple one table query. So let's go a little bit more and do a complex query with a join in there. So we're going to ask, can you plot the amounts of those loans, referring to the loans we handled in 2023, versus the property value of the loans associated to them? And now we're going to showcase two characteristics. One, it's a complex query with a join. It's a simple join, but it's a more complex because it involves various schemas. And the graph generation part of the SDK, which is really good to get a feel and start to explore the data you have in your data sources. So here it said I have plotted the loan amounts. So let's check out the graph. And we can see here the different loan amounts. So for this loan, for example, we see that it's got more or less the same loan amount, but this one over here, the loan amount is higher than the property value. But let's say I don't really understand what this data means, right? So the good thing about the chatbot is that we can ask the SDK to explain it to us. So let's ask, what consequences does this data have? And then hopefully you'll be able to explain what a bigger loan, a higher or lower property value, loan amount over the property value has for us. Uh, so
So
again,
interesting
it'll go
that
retrieve that data. Yeah,
you're getting sort of investigation territory, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. We can see here the data shows us a general correlation between loan amounts and property values. However, the outliers indicate that there might be cases where loans are approved for amounts that are significantly lower. How this could be due to various factors, such as the borrower's credit, income, and other financial factors. So we can really use this to start exploring the data and get a feel for it. This has been all on my end for the chatbot. I don't know if you want to jump into the documentation, or do you have any questions, Felix?
What about the API? What can you show us around the API, the Swagger doc, right?
Perfect. Let's go to the Swagger docs then. So here we have the quick
So
link.
I don't like the chat. I don't like the example. I don't like the look of it. So what can I do to build my own chatbot?
Well, the SDK comes with this set of APIs, and every single part that we've reviewed with the chatbot, you'll be able to see it here. So when we click the Sync Vector Store Database button, we were actually calling Get Metadata, which I'm going to show it here. It has a lot more configuration parameters that obviously can align to the specific use case you're using it for, but it's the same. So here we have the examples per table that we set the value to 3, and here we have the VDB database names, and that will do exactly what we did. It will load the data into the vector store for the ASDK to use it for questions. And then we have the ask a question endpoints, which are the same endpoints that we were calling from the chatbot. We have the answer metadata question, which would be the red tooltip, and we have the answer data question, would be the blue tooltip, which is the actual query rag pattern implemented. So generate the SQL query and execute it.
Yeah, I was going to add the Swagger doc is very, very important in the future because we're seeing a lot of these agentic ecosystem developing where It's not about one agent that rules all. It's about multiple agents working together. So, but this is why we build this in OpenAI specification with our Swagger, because a lot of the ecosystem we're already seeing, for example, Google Vortex, except OpenAI specification, if you want to register an agent, right? So these almost work out of the box with any ecosystem that can accept OpenAI specification. We've even done this with ChatGPT. So super useful, right? Because it's not about a specific chatbot we built, but the ability for customer to use this API in a very flexible way, powerful way. Yeah, super cool. Thank you for that. Let's
Of
see,
course.
couple other things maybe we can just quickly talk about in terms of the actually while you have the Swagger dot, I know one of
Yeah.
my favorite feature in the last couple of releases is custom instruction. So do you want to show that and actually explain why that's so useful?
Yeah. So again, and this comes with the whole premise of giving flexibility with the ASDK, right? You can modify it to do anything you want. And that's represented very well by the parameter here we have in custom in the answer question, which is custom instructions, which is really good to help because at the end of the day, the query rack pattern, it's a generic flow. It's not adapted to any specific industry or any specific knowledge base. So if you really want to get that final gain in terms of percentage of accuracy, you really have to use the custom instructions because you can really point and help the LLM understand more or behave how you want it to behave. It's endless possibilities here. So you can use it to answer in a specific language if you want. You can use it to explain certain parts of your database. So for example, if I say, okay, when I'm asking you to retrieve this type of data, I want you to go to these databases. So you start pointing it in the right direction. Or you can even use it as persona building. So depending on the user that is interacting with the SDK, they will be interested in different type of information, or they'll be using, for example, different types of KPIs. So it builds a much more personalized experience into the SDKs through this parameter.
I've got a simple example, Manuel.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna extend your the loan example, right? So I mean, yeah, I use this a
Okay.
lot where quite often in the banking scenario, they have the concept of high value customer, right? Quite often the bank I bank with perhaps the high value customer definition is any customer with a loan over $1 million. We don't know that. The data doesn't know that. The SDK doesn't know that, but we can easily add that in the custom extraction, can't we?
Yep. Absolutely.
So
We
you
can
can
we can
literally just
just
type it
try
in,
it.
right?
Yeah.
High value
We
customers,
can
any
literally
customer.
just type it in. We're not going to try it out, but we can type it in just to
Yeah.
say any customer over $1 million in net worth is considered
Or loan amount in your example, right?
or a low amount.
Yeah. So
No, it's
that's why
considered high value client.
I think it's a pretty common feature these days where RAG is really good. A lot of the preview stuff is very useful. The gap is always and will always be the lack of the specific business context, right? We can't cover all industry or example, but we're allowing customer to inject this custom instruction to provide that context. So that's pretty cool. Anything else you want to talk about? I know in the 05 release, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, there's some performance gain. What else you want to talk about in the recent release?
Yeah, so obviously, we are always focusing on improving the SDK, the performance, making it faster, making it more efficient, making it more lean. But we're also bringing a lot of support. For example, we included support, as I said, for Google AI Studio, which is very good because it's a free platform for testing environment. And we're looking at more performance increases in the chatbot, for example, as I just showcased right now. So really, we're just building on top of what we have and making it faster, making it better.
Cool, good to hear. Excellent. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up. Before we wrap it up, so maybe did you want to unshare? I just want to share a couple of the resources
Perfect. Yeah.
that people might be interested in. So I'm gonna switch over to my slide. Just one last slide, everybody. So hopefully you're excited about how easy, how powerful this type of integration in terms of using Query Rag, Denodo, and you're using existing data. It could be Oracle, Postgres, it doesn't really matter, Salesforce, SAP. But we've made it extremely easy to get going. So there's the first part, the QR code on the right hand side will take you to the Denodo Express download website. Denodo Express is a completely free version of Denodo that you can use, you can spin up, and you can connect to your existing data sources. It also has the SDK included in the download, so you don't even need a separate download. So very, very easy, very, very quickly for anyone to actually get Denodo, deploy, connect to data sources, and actually deploy the SDK. Play with your data, talk to your data, and see what kind of use cases you can cover off. So we made it very easy to do that because we think it's a pretty powerful solution in terms of deploying SDK and how easy it is to deploy these type of applications. So that's the Node Express. We mentioned
I
earlier,
wanted to cut you
yeah,
off, Felix.
okay.
Just to mention that the chatbot, the demo that I showcased today, was done completely on the Denodo Express.
Oh, there you
So you
go.
can literally replicate the same results. Yeah.
There you go. Good, good, good call out there. The other one is the GitHub we mentioned earlier. So if you're interested to go to the GitHub, you can just Google Denodo SDK, or you can go to the QR code. It's a pretty standard, pretty normal GitHub repo where I think maybe you talk about. Obviously, you can download the code. What else people can check out on that repo?
Yeah, so I mean, you have access to the whole code, to all the sample data, and you can raise issues if you want, and we'll get back to you. Or you can even contribute. It's open source. Welcome any contributions. So yeah, waiting to hear everyone's opinions over there.
Great stuff, man. With that said, we're gonna close. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining the fireside chat, Manuel.
Thank you, Felix.
Next time. Bye.